Okay, so I found something kind of interesting. Well, not really kind of interesting, but very interesting about what Oracle CEO Larry Ellison says on this earnings call, specifically from the time I'm going to start it until when I finish it, about Nvidia and what they're going to spend on AI chips. And since Nvidia is pretty much 90% of the market, and then I'm going to show you another thing that I found. Let's just call it 90% of the market for Nvidia. They pretty much own that. Unless AMD, which is their biggest competitor, can somehow come up with a better system for data centers and so on and so forth, I think they're going to continue to get smashed. I might be wrong, but even if AMD can somehow figure out how to gain more market share, I don't think it even matters because these companies have already committed to Nvidia. But let's say they do figure out to gain a little more market share. I even with the amount of money being spent, I don't think it matters that much in the grand scheme of things. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play this for you, and I'm going to play it before the first the question that I really want to listen to gets asked, because Larry Ellison says something, a few things at the back half of this that I thought was very important, and he talks about how these chips are really affecting their ability to become more profitable as a company. And when you think about that, if you think about companies and their drive for profitability, then you can understand that there's the reason why they want to drop so much money on this is because they're getting such a good ROI, these big players. I'm not talking about every player, but the big players, they're definitely getting ROI, and it's showing up on their bottom lines, on their earnings reports, and in their numbers, and everything the CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Andy Jassy, all those guys, Sundar Pichai, uh, all those guys say on their earnings calls about what these chips are doing for their company's bottom lines. And so when I think about that, I think about like a huge win coming for Nvidia, because they're just not going to stop spending, because they're also all in competition with each other. And Larry Ellison's going to cover some of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and press play here.
Much better margins than we're currently delivering are very real.
So is it safe for me to assume that then the upside you keep putting up and you hopefully will continue to do, it will add profit, and that profit will actually increase as a percentage. The margins will also increase over time.
Uh, I believe so, and I believe, for example, I mean, I think you'd find differing points of view from different engineers as we move Fusion to autonomous database. I think the cost savings, our cloud cost savings will be around 50%. That's what I believe. Now it might be 40%, might be 35%, but there'll be huge cost savings from where we are now, and that's across the entire base of Fusion customers. And that's just one example of how we're using faster networks, faster databases, more automation to make our products more secure. And I keep emphasizing the security is really the primary goal. But as a second order effect, we also end up spending a lot less money to run those data centers.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Safra.
Your next question comes from the line of Mark Murphy with JP Morgan. Your line is open.
Oh, thank you very much, and congrats on a great performance. Larry, how do you envision the market transitioning from the AI training phase to the AI inferencing phase? There's some debate out there on whether we have an imbalance or a bubble on the front end of the curve, because training is so compute intensive, and then perhaps it recalibrates differently somehow for the inferencing stage, which might be less intensive? Or do you see the potential for high growth kind of all the way through both of these phases?
Well, a lot of people think that, my God, I send a kid to college and then I'm done. The training's over. I got 4 years of training, and then I can put the kid to work, and they'll be doing inferencing. And that's not true. This race goes on forever to build a better and better neural network. And the cost of that training gets to be astronomical When I talk about building gigawatt or multi-gigawatt data centers, I mean, these AI models, these frontier models are the entry price for a real frontier model from someone who wants to compete in that area is around $100 billion. Let me repeat, around $100 billion. That's over the next 4 or 5 years for anyone who wants to play in that game. That's a lot of money, and it doesn't get easier. So there are not going to be a lot of those. I mean, this is not the place to list who can actually build one of these frontier models. But in addition to that, there are going to be a lot of very, very specialized models. I can tell you things that I'm personally involved in, which are using computers to look at biopsies of slides or CAT scans to discover cancer. Also, there are also blood tests we're doing for discovering cancer. Those tend to be very specialized models. Those tend not necessarily to use the foundational, the Groks and the ChatGPTs and the Llamas and the Geminis. They tend to be highly specialized models, trained on image recognition and on certain data. I mean, literally millions of biopsy slides, for example, and not much other training data is helpful. So that goes on, and we'll see more and more applications like that. So I wouldn't, if your horizon is over the next 5 years, maybe even the next 10 years, I wouldn't worry about, hey, we've now trained all the models we need, and all we need to do is inferencing. I think this is an ongoing battle for technical supremacy that will be fought by a handful of companies and maybe one nation state over the next 5 years at least, but probably more like 10. So this business is just growing larger and larger and larger. There's no slowdown or shift coming.
Thank you very much.
Let me say something that's going to sound really bizarre. Well, though, you'd probably say, well, he says bizarre things all the time. So why is he announcing this one? It must be really bizarre. So we're in the middle of designing a data center that's north of the gigawatt. But we found the location and the power place. We've looked at it. They've already got building permits for 3 nuclear reactors. These are the small modular nuclear reactors to power the data center. This is how crazy it's getting. This is what's going on.
Incredible.
Your next question comes from the line of Raimo Lenschow with Barclays. Your line is open.
Hey, thank you. Just a question more on the database side, on the agreements that you just announced today, or that you have in place and now added with AWS. So now that we have all the hyperscaler agreements in place, how do you think about that migration movement from database workloads that are at the moment running on premise or on cloud at customer to the public cloud? I mean, how should we think about that momentum? Thank you.
Well, we think it's going to accelerate, basically. No, you go ahead, Larry.
No. I think you're right. Well, there's 2 things. Public cloud is very interesting and is very important. I mean, Oracle became very successful in the database business a long time ago because one of our watchwords was portability. We ran on IBM mainframes. We ran on Microsoft PCs. We ran on Hewlett Packard machines, and if you remember them, digital equipment machines, and all sorts of computers. But we ran everywhere, and that was very important. So our customers could run the Oracle database in any environment, and it's obviously and we had to find a way to actually make the best versions of our database, the Exadata, Exascale versions of our database, available in other people's clouds. And what we were able to do was basically get OCI small enough that we could embed an OCI data center within Microsoft Azure, or an OCI data center within Google or AWS, or wherever we had to put it, where it could be fully autonomous, where we could use Exadata and Exascale clusters. We actually were able to do that. It was not technically easy, but we did it. In doing that, in miniaturizing our Oracle data centers, I mentioned earlier that all of our data centers are the same except in scale. The biggest one's 800 gigawatts right now, getting close to 800 megawatts, getting close to 1 gigawatt. The smallest are about 150 kilowatts, and we're going to get down to 50 kilowatts. What that means is we'll have a lot of companies, even medium, large-sized companies, that will decide to have an Oracle private cloud. I mean, there's no difference between our private cloud and the public cloud. They are identical. They're absolutely identical. And a bunch of people have Oracle private clouds. A bunch of industrial companies. Vodafone has 6, Oracle private clouds, for example, to run their workloads. But they're becoming so inexpensive that anyone can decide, okay, I want to move to the cloud. I want all the advantages of the cloud, but I want to make sure that I'm the only one in the cloud. I don't want any neighbors, or I want only approved neighbors. I don't want someone with a credit card moving in. I'm just paranoid about security, or I've got government regulations I have to adhere to. So we think that obviously moving, with Oracle database available on AWS, Microsoft, and Google is incredibly important. And Safra said it right. I mean, it will absolutely accelerate database growth in the public cloud. But we expect that private clouds will greatly outnumber public clouds as companies decide they want the Oracle cloud behind their firewall in their data center with no neighbors. And because we've gotten our data centers are so automated and they're scalable and they're all identical in terms of function, we're organized so we have 162 data centers now. I expect we will have 1,000 or 2,000 or more data centers, Oracle Cloud data centers around the world, and a lot of them will be dedicated to individual banks or telecommunications companies or technology companies or.
Okay, so did you hear that? They have like 100 something data centers, right? But he's thinking they're going to go 1,000, 2,000. Now, when we take that into consideration, we have to consider that who builds the data centers and what GPUs, the accelerated compute. So they're getting rid of general compute, right? And when you think about like Nvidia, they make the best accelerated compute chips, and really, who do they have to battle with? Intel is terrible, and AMD just doesn't have it, right? And I'll show you here in a minute. But when you think about that, they're going from 100 some odd data centers to over 1,000 to maybe 2,000, right? All this data is coming off of these companies, on-prem situations, whatever they have, and they're going into the Oracle or the Google or the Microsoft or Amazon clouds, right? And so it's not even the frontier AI models that Nvidia is going to be making money from. It's from all of these data centers, right? And if you think about so just to build an AI frontier model, like he said, entry level is $100 billion, right? Now I've made a list of companies that are building these frontier AI models because Larry didn't say it on the earnings call, or who could, right? It's going to be Oracle, OpenAI, Tesla. Tesla's not essentially the same, but because they're full self-driving and robotics department, they're going to need an incredible amount of inference. And when you can imagine Tesla's full self-driving, right? But in 10 years, let's say 5 to 10 years, right, after they get it all squared away, after Tesla fixes every little hiccup, and, most of the hiccups are pretty much gone, and they can just, use the full self-driving. What happens when it comes into law that every new car needs to be outfitted with that full self-driving? And Tesla is by far and away ahead of everybody. So we're talking Ford, GM, Chrysler, or Stellantis, whatever you want to call it, Mercedes, Kia, Honda, Toyota. You get the point, right? Are all going to need or forced to make their cars full self-driving, which is going to run on an inference, which is going to run on data centers, which is going to run on Nvidia GPUs. So the amount of inference for that alone, and the robotics that Figure One, OpenAI, Tesla, and a few other big companies are building, the amount of inference. And then think about like how much that's going to cost to spend. I bet you Tesla spends more money than everybody else on these Nvidia GPUs. And so when we look at that, we got Meta, we got Twitter, we got Microsoft, we got Amazon, we got Google, we got Anthropic, we got Mistral AI, we got the United States spending money on this stuff. And probably most of the governments around the world, and the Saudis are probably going to drop a ton of money on this. And Chinese companies are getting, the shaft because we put up regulations on them, and so they can't get the same stuff. But Nvidia still makes them chips, but that market is highly competitive because Nvidia is not allowed to make them the chips that China really wants. So now I'm going to go to another little piece here, and I'm going to show you something. So when we understand how many companies is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, plus the US, plus the Saudis, and all the other smaller companies. But we're just going to go with there's 11 here, and they're all going to drop 100 billion at minimum over the next 4 to 5 years, right? And so here we have data center revenue by quarter, right in front of your faces. So what we're looking at here, that's what? 48, 66, 80, 90, and what's that? 11. So on data centers alone from Nvidia, we've got a little over 100 billion in spend already, right? Okay. And he says over the next 4 to 5 years, every one of those guys is going to spend 100 billion, and that's not to mention all the smaller companies, and that's not to mention all the smaller models. That's not to mention all the governments, right? And the full build out of all that. I mean, when we think about that, it's absolutely absurdity, right? Okay. If there's another, let's just call it at the bare minimum, another $1 trillion worth to spend left, and Nvidia is getting 90% of that, they're going to get $900 billion in revenue over the next 4 to 5 years. Now, let's break that down for a second. And they're getting net margins of above 50%. Let's just call it 50%, right? So it's a $450 billion in net income coming into this company. $450 billion. Now break that down. That's over $100 billion a freaking year if you give them 4 years, right? $100 billion a year. Microsoft and Apple are only making about 80 to 90 billion in net income a year, and both of them have bigger market caps than Nvidia, and neither of those two are growing like Nvidia. And this is just the knowledge we know now. What happens in 2 years when they decide we need to spend even more money? Because the idea is, based on what Larry said, that there's going to be more spend, right? And it could go on for another 10 years, right? And this build out is going to be absolutely massive. And then what happens when Nvidia comes out with better chips that cost more? What is that going to do for their margins? What is that going to do for the revenue build? You know what I mean? Like, if we wrap our head around this, it's complete absurdity, right? And I think that's worth mentioning. And I know people wanted me to talk about investing and stuff like that, and so here we go. This is what you got. I'll put it on my my YouTube, and I'll share it to Facebook for you guys. And anybody who wants to watch it can watch it. But I appreciate it if you subscribe and like. I'll make some more of these videos. But yeah, And if you look at Nvidia across the board here, not only is it their data center revenue, now their data center revenue has gone up tremendous. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, right? But their gaming segment over the last, year and a half, how many quarters is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So over the last 2 years, their gaming has almost doubled up. Their professional visualization has over doubled. Their auto is, slightly up, and OEM and others is slightly up, right? Which is fine, because where are you really looking for this professional visualization is growing like a weed, though. It's over a double up, right? That's pretty big. And I guarantee an auto is going to come up, and quite significantly, because of some of the things that Nvidia said on their last earnings call. Anyways, y'all, have a good night, and I'll share this to you guys. Anyways, y'all take her easy.